going to talk about Chinatown and The Two Jakes, the classic film and its unfortunate sequel, basically. I've also just read the actual Making of Chinatown book that came out a few years ago, which is all about the development of Chinatown, how it was made, and how people moved on from it after the release of the film. So that will affect what I'm talking about. But I'll discuss it as I go, talking about the films. Because so Chinatown was basically was one of the big last gasps of independent cinema from the studio system. Now, people talk about the 70s a lot, about how great the 70s were, but really the 70s in filmmaking was like the 68 till about 73, 74. Where there was a lot of experimentation, no one knew what worked anymore, they tried lots of things, a lot of interesting films get made. Then by the mid-70s, the blockbusters started to come back into fashion. And there was always blockbusters even then. So this was not an era where it was just purely experimental films. They were still trying to make blockbusters. I mean, they were making, lots of genre films as well as the more artistic films. So they were trying to mix it up. It's just that the genre films became really popular around about Jaws and Star Wars, and then they realised they could make a lot of money from that, and slowly over the next 5 years, they were still making films that were a bit more difficult, but that was getting pushed out a little bit. And then by the time we hit the 80s, the kind of genre films were taken over, and the kind of character-based films were getting pushed to the back to be Oscar season stuff. I mean, there were always Oscar season stuff, but there was more of them. There was more interest in odd films, and then they kind of fell away. Now, Chinatown came to the end of the peak period of this, where you could do a big studio film that was more character and plot based, more character based with a strong narrative and a complicated plot that wasn't simplistic. That was one of the reasons why it was so huge. This came out in Paramount. Paramount was going through a golden run at the time, which is astonishing because pretty much after Chinatown, Paramount hit a run that is still on where it might have some hits, but it was never viewed as a great studio because there was just a lot of trashy films made by them and a lot of mediocre films. They were the studio that was probably most TV-like in its output. I mean, the studio that made the Mission Impossible films, it made the Untouchables, it made Beverly Hills Cop films, and a lot of the films it made weren't visually terrific, is the best way to put it. But it came from somewhere different. Paramount for a while was trying important stuff. I mean, Chinatown came off the flush success of The Godfather and Love Story, and a lot of Robert Evans was the studio head. He produced a lot of big films that made money. He brought Paramount back to the brink. Paramount had been making massive bombs like It's Paramount Bonding or things like that. And he can bring it back and actually started making logical films that were successes. And even though something like Love Story was a bit of a joke, ultimately, a lot of people loved it. But he used that success to do stuff like The Godfather, to do stuff like produce a Conversation in Paper Moon through the director's company. And indulge directors a little bit, but also have his stamp on it. So one of his big successes the other one was Rosemary's Baby, which was directed by Roman Polanski. And he's always keen to get Polanski back. He's also working a lot with Robert Towne, who was a big new writer. He'd worked for Roger Corman. He'd done rewrites for films. He'd rewritten the New Centurions and disowned it. Which is odd if you look at the film, because the film's a very good film, so I don't get why he disowned it. It's like he's written stuff with his name on it that's so much worse than New Centurions. New Centurions is a good film. The narrative can be a bit fragmented at times, but there's so many good scenes in there. It's like, well, Richard Fletcher did a very good job directing it, so it's really weird why he disowned that one. But he had a run where he helped with Bonnie and Clyde. He'd rewritten a couple of scenes for The Godfather. He'd written The Last Detail, which was a big success. He was writing Shampoo with Warren Beatty. But in this time he wanted to do his own individual, unique film. He wanted to do a detective story, which was Chinatown. Chinatown took forever to write. Robert Towne was a guy who took forever to write his own projects. Like he could write other people's projects really quick and do rewrites really quick. Plus, he didn't really care that much. Ultimately, they were just projects. But his own project, his own narrative, it took him forever to make his mind up about narrative threads and what was going on. So he turned in a script that was way too long for Chinatown that Robert Evans had already guaranteed to buy as long as he turned it in. So he now had this massive script and he had no clue what to do with it. So he brought in Roman Polanski. And Polanski liked the idea, but Polanski was coming off of personal problems because his wife Sharon Tate had been murdered in the late 60s. And he'd kind of gone off in lots of like benders of sex and drugs and things through the 70s, lots of parties. And he was into like younger girls and things like that, which would bite him just after Chinatown was released. He was in a spiral that was gonna really get him eventually. He was just in a spiral of basically he'd lived through the Holocaust. He'd found ways to survive that. He'd lived through a lot of hard times, and then when he was actually managed to try and heal himself a little bit, his wife died, and ultimately he was spinning back out of control, and this was the last great work of Polanski, basically. He would do some other good films, but the peak was over after Chinatown. So Evans got Polanski, and Polanski and Towne hated each other because Polanski told Towne to cut half the script, because the script was too long, and apparently it went all over the place, and a lot of things didn't link up, which is very important to realise when we get to the two Jakes. You know, it's very important. So there's lots of interesting stuff there, but it hadn't been focused. So Polanski said basically, there's so many characters, Polanski said, okay, basically, anything that's not with our detective is gone. And anything that's important that the detective has to know, that we need to know for the story, has to go through the detective. And he just get rid of subplots left, right and centre. So there's a lot of characters were gone, other characters were cut down, but they had to all go through J.J. Gittys' character. And it was all about what this character could see, what he could react to, and that was the point. So Polanski came in and actually focused the script. And it was a script written for Jack Nicholson, so it's always going to be him, and this is his big star movie, basically. And he delivered. He's great in the film. You know, he's cocky when he needs to be. He's sympathetic because he's in over his head, but he doesn't. He always stands up to people who are trying to put the thumb on him. So he's a terrific. He's a very Nicholson character, rebellious, but smart enough to try and survive. And it's just like early Nicholson greatness. It just works really well. He understands the script, understands the character. It was written by someone who knew him well, knew what he could do, and who could write and protect him from other stuff that might not be as good at. So that were terrific. They got Faye Dunaway, who they wanted Jane Fonda, but they got Faye Dunaway, and she was apparently a handful because she was insecure. But from most accounts, Nicholson held her hand through the production a lot and helped her deal with Polanski, who really was not coddling her at all. So it was a tense production. According to this book, it was a very tense production. And the film's terrific because it's all about futility of good intentions. It's about how people in power take what they want and they use the laws to circumnavigate anything, and they can find sneaky ways through procedure and through laws and through things that no one can understand to steal from different people. So it's all about stuff in the system that you have to actually get through the different gatekeepers to find information out and then slowly piece it together. But it's all very complicated. It's all about land rights, and it's all about having land that is worth nothing just now, but worth a lot pretty soon. if they do things with the water system that actually will build a dam that will make land suddenly really be important. So it's basically how do you swindle everybody to make money, and it's about how the people in charge can take this desert place, which is Los Angeles, and turn it into fertile ground and dam the different rivers so that you can actually fertilize the land and make it be able to grow stuff on and make it worthwhile. But obviously that leads to murder because some people don't want to do what the people in power want to do, which leads to the murder that takes place early on. Of Hollis Mulray, who is the husband of Catherine Mulray, who's the femme fatale played by Faye Dunaway, and it's all about trying to work out what she's actually about, because she obviously knows something, but you're not quite sure what she knows, and is she really setting them up, or is she not? It turns out as everyone knows, she's a victim of incest, and she's a victim. She's trying to protect her daughter from her father, who is also the father of her daughter, and she just tries to protect her from him, and she can't really tell anybody. So it's a complicated situation. And Gittes is not the person who should be involved in this, because he's way over his head. And he's trying to figure out something. And he's trying to stick it to the man. And it's a completely wrong approach, because he doesn't realise he's outmatched, outgunned by everybody. And it just becomes a sense of how the little man can't win. You can fight to survive, basically, but you can't win against these people with money who can basically pay off the cops to do what they want. They basically own the cops. So Chinatown's about that sense of futility through the detective genre. Now, detective genre tends to be a murder takes place, we find out why the murder took place, and the person's say, oh, you did it for this reason, for some money or something. After Chinatown, a lot of detective stories become much more about corruption, and much more about how you can't fight corruption. So this is a very influential film, because it changed the detective genre from being generally about a smaller crime that was what you could deal with, like the Raymond Chandler stuff, where there was a crime, you deal with the crime. There might be a few social issues to it, but the crime's a crime and that's solved. Now after Chinatown, it became much more the cynicism of the world, that no one can actually survive big companies and what they're about. I mean, you can feel the influence of Point Blank in Chinatown, because Point Blank was also another film about a guy facing against the system and finding the systems were way bigger and way more complicated than he was. It also took place in Los Angeles, but it was a modern Los Angeles, where there was no money, just credit cards. And this one there's money, but the power's already in the system and in places you can't find, in places that are protected, where people get paid off to look the other way if something horrible happens. And it's just a wonderful film, so well made, and it's one of those things that you expected Polanski to go on from this to just do some great stuff. Instead, his personal life went to hell. He get basically charged with rape of a minor and fled the country, and that was him in Europe for the rest of his life. And he never really dealt with the situation. Now, if he'd stayed in the country and done his time, I mean, he still would have had a stigma over him, but he would have been able to work there eventually again, probably. But he never, so it became this thing hung over him forever. And that was that. He was a very talented guy, but he was self-destructive, and he went through hell as a child and through hell as a young man, and there was just obviously lots of stuff still gnawing away at him. And the book covers a lot of Making Chinatown. The book also covers Jack Nicholson's his past, to Robert Evans's past, and Robert Towns' past. Now, Robert Towns is an interesting character in this television book, but also from stuff you've heard over the years, just from different publications, where he's fallen out with a lot of important people. And the book kind of puts him more into context, and he's had problems with his ex-wife, and he's had a lot of issues. And he's had a career that is almost a definition of disappointing. Like, Chinatown was not just Polanski's last big, great film. It was basically, Robert Towne's last big great film too, because he worked on other projects, and most of them did not go well. Like he made Personal Best with way over budget. He was meant to direct Greystoke All About Tarzan, which meant to be a serious Tarzan film, which is absurdly weird idea. Trying to do a serious Tarzan film is stupid. Okay, so he tried to do that. He lost the rights because of Personal Best. Then he made a bunch of films like Tequila Sunrise. It didn't do well, and he basically a scriptwriter again for lots of different people. He did some work in The Firm. He did some work on Days of Thunder. Yeah, he did 2 Mission Impossible movies for Tom Cruise, of which the first one was a good film, but De Palma did a lot of problems with Robert Towne. So De Palma did not like working with Robert Towne. It seems that Towne gets on badly with strong-willed directors who want stuff done their way and shot for visual clarity. He also wrote Mission Impossible 2, lone screenwriter on that one, worst film in the series, John Woo's worst film. It was a disaster. It was one of those ones that was like, oh my god, this is so bad. What happened? You know. And he's barely been heard from since then. So Towne, if you read the book, Towne comes off really badly in that book. Towne just looks horrible in that book. Especially when it comes to The Two Jakes. Now, The Two Jakes was initially meant to be Robert Towne directing it, and he was writing it. And it was a sequel to Chinatown, because Polanski was out, couldn't come back, obviously, because of legal reasons. They were going to shoot it in 85, and they were going to do the sequel all about the aftermath of Chinatown, basically 10 years later, 10, 15 years later, basically after the war, because Chinatown takes place in the 30s, this takes place in the 40s, after the war has just ended. Gitties is back as a private detective, he's doing well, and it was the idea of he's involved in a case where a woman's cheating on her husband. Her husband finds out, her husband shoots the guy in a fit of rage, and basically, was it a fit of rage or was it premeditated murder? But that's a good idea. And there's lots of good stuff in this film, but as it's been pointed out repeatedly, the script wasn't finished. Even before they went into production, the script still wasn't finished. It was like 80% done. They still hadn't worked out certain things in the script. And you can see in the film, there's a middle section of this film that has lots of stuff happening that is very unmotivated. Because the film starts strong, and it has a strong conclusion. Like the motivation for everything actually makes sense. And the idea of people haunted by the past, not quite over the past, it's a strong one. So you've got a beginning and an end that actually have lots of strong elements. There's a middle that just goes from place to place, and it's like very unmotivated. It's we realise you miss Polanski actually saying like this stuff needs to actually have a point of view. You can't just wander around from scene to scene. So Tim was meant to direct it. Then he had problems dealing with Robert Evans, who was a producer but also meant to be starring in it with Nicholson, and he wasn't working out in the part. And Nicholson defended him. Towne couldn't work with him, and everything fell apart. But also, they're saying Towne was very difficult to deal with generally. So all hell broke loose. The film fell apart, and then a few years later, Nicholson, after doing all the lawsuits, managed to get Paramount to actually finance it. So he'd take the original script, and Nicholson would direct it and star in it. And, they would make the film. Now, Nicholson's actually a lot better director than you'd think. He did a few films in the 70s, and he has a good eye for stuff, and he got Vilmos Zsigmond to be the DP. There's lots of nice shots in there, and lots of interesting angles, and you can tell he had a visual energy that was really interesting. And it can work in lots of places. But it also means that because he's directing himself, Nicholson sometimes lets Nicholson have excesses. Which is one of the problems in the middle of the film when the plot's meandering. You know, that's where the excesses as an actor can come out a little bit. Because he's obviously trying to find ways to make things interesting in scenes that don't quite come together. And the film doesn't quite come together. There's some voiceover added to try and add stuff, and there's some voiceover, some of this voiceover is quite nice. And it's about loss, it's about the idea of people as being walking wounded. So this film feels a lot of ways like an epilogue to Chinatown, not actually a sequel. Because the stuff is the epilogue to Chinatown, talking about how people can't move on. All that stuff's really strong. It's when you try and do this other second story, there are lots of things that aren't actually clear. Like, they don't clarify. Nicholson will get this recording of the shooting, which is basically their kind of audio, like, blow up thing, is what's been said, you know, or conversation, that kind of thing. With what's been said, how's it said, what does it all mean? Because Nicholson thinks there's something in that. But it's never clarified in the script as what's in this. It's mentioned, but it's never mentioned. It never lands. Like, why is he keeping it back? And what's he worried about? That stuff there needs to be clarified, and it's not clarified. There's the stuff with Richard Farnsworth as basically is a rich oil dude who's up to no good, obviously. And he wanders into the film and wanders back out. And you're feeling that there should be something else there. Doesn't need to be something that's like the original, like Chinatown's plot, like the John Huston plot, but at least there's something else there that's not there. There's interesting stuff about Jake, but it's called The Two Jakes, and Jake disappears for like half the film. And Harvey Keitel's playing him, and Harvey Keitel's a good actor. But he's not given that much. The character's a facade, and you're never quite sure who he is. And they needed a more mysterious actor, or they need to take Keitel and say, okay, we need more scenes in the middle with him. It has to be one or the other. It's either a star performance or it's or you develop the character more. And they don't do either. They just have him early on and have him much later on. And whenever he's there, the film works. When Keitel's there, the film works. He anchors it really well. So I think it's a case of they need to add more Keitel in the middle to try and make the mystery there more interesting. Ruben Blades shows up as Keitel's pal as well, and he's good. There's some fun scenes where Nicholson runs into people he knows in the past, and he ends up in a gay bar to try and find information out, which is fun. Which is a fun little sequence. There's all these interesting bits in the film. Every time you wander another place, it's always like, oh, that's interesting. That's a character like to this. Well, that's interesting. Frederick Forrest shows up as a lawyer. Madeleine Stowe's in it as the wife of the killed man. She's fun, but she's also in the worst scene in the film where her and Nicholson hook up, and it's the embarrassing Jack Nicholson gets laid scene because he's the director, and it's the worst scene in the film. It's overacting, it's weird, and it's like, what's that going to do with the film? You've just waylaid the narrative. So there's lots of stuff like that going on, and it's just like, they needed this middle section to be laid out clearer. Like, we needed to be clear of why is he not handing this stuff over? You know, like specifically why he's doing it, because they tell you much later on, and you needed to know it well before that, because you've watched them thinking, why are you not just handing over? It's saving you a lot of problems, and we're not defining why you're not doing it. And it also means the mystery of why he's not doing it, and him trying to work out this mystery, means the mystery is not as clear as it should be. And it means a lot of scenes of hanging around trying to find these things that don't connect properly. So there's lots of scenes like that that are frustrating, especially if you've just watched Chinatown. Which I watched these one day, one next, and the clarity of Chinatown and the vagueness of Two Jakes become really obvious. And which is a shame, because there are nice things in this film. Nicholson generally is really good. But in some ways I think he needed to direct another film without him starring in it, and have a director come in here who he trusted to direct this film. And to actually say, look, this needs sorted, because I think the big problem with this film was he was too close to it. He was trying to do everything. He was doing his best. And he was kind of a bit blind to some of the flaws in the middle section. And he needed someone objectively to say, sort that, because it doesn't make sense yet. So the film did go into production with a script that wasn't fully there. And it's really in the middle section which it's really telling. Like, at the end, your feeling is they cut one or two things that certain things could have landed better, but you still get the point of them. I still think there's an emotional beat to them. I just think it's about stuff that can never really be resolved. And maybe they could have done it slightly better, but I still have affection for the film because of the stuff it does well. I mean, it's no ways near as good as Chinatown, but there's a lot of really good bits in the film. It's just the bad bits are frustrating because it was like it was a script that was abandoned basically because Town, once he was replaced, he never came back. He was writing Days of Thunder while they were making this film for the same studio. And you look, it's like, I know your feelings were hurt, but you're doing this trash rather than the sequel to Chinatown. What's wrong with you? So there's a film that falls down mostly because of the script. Because our feeling is that some of the problems I said toward the middle section of the script have been stronger there. Some of the excesses wouldn't have actually come into play. And there's some stuff towards the end where Nichols is against the police that are basically padding scenes because they have to do some of these police characters, and it's obvious the script hasn't worked out how to really motivate them. Well, they were very motivated in the original. In this one, it feels that they're vague presences that have to be dealt with, but there's no scenes in the script that are actually solid as you need them to be. And that just goes through the middle of the film. It's just a thing where the film starts to lose its steam as you're going into the late first half and the early second half. And it comes back and forth after that. Bits are interesting, bits are not. And there's a lot of stuff that's like, you could lose that, and write a scene to connect them up better. But you need the original writer to do that, and the original writer wasn't there, and it was like, you can't have to blame Town for this. He wrote the script. The ideas were good, but it needed work. And he did not finish the script, and it's kind of obvious who the problem is in this film. So, and if you read the book, it becomes obvious that, yeah, it was Town. You know, it was like, everyone else tried. I mean, Polanski said nice things about the film, but he said they should never have went ahead without the script being finished. You know, which is true. They shouldn't have. But it's also true the film is actually, there's some lot of beautiful things here. And it's like, it was obviously a thing where people fell apart and the friendships fell apart in this film. And so it's a bit of a tragedy, but it's also a kind of beautiful film in lots of ways too. So it's a weird situation. It's like, it's one of those films I've watched a lot, you know, even though I know it's got lots of problems. It's just that kind of film. I saw it in the cinema when it came out. I'm one of the few people who saw it. So, both are definitely worth watching. Chinatown's a much better film, but Two Jakes is interesting too. So I hope you enjoyed this video, this very long video, and I'll be back with another one soon. Right, bye for now.